we'll speak on many subjects. So, because Mamavi Osabwaji is ready to speak on the president's interview with Al Jazeera, but its resultant controversy, especially not only in the media, but also on social media, and what the comments have been from the Christian Council and other religious groupings. Also in the studio will be Sheikh Shaibu, who is a Muslim cleric. Well, let's again watch Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the President of the Republic of Ghana, in that interview.
Homosexuality, for example, which I believe is illegal and it's punishable. I mean, why is homosexuality still illegal in your country?
The social, cultural issues, if you like. I don't believe that in Ghana so far a sufficiently strong coalition has emerged, which is having that impact on public opinion that will say, change it. Let's then have a new paradigm in Ghana.
Is that something you would get behind?
I think that it is something that is bound to happen. And when that happens,
what's going to provoke it? What's going to make it happen?
Oh, it's the activity, like elsewhere in the world. Like elsewhere in the world, the activities of individuals, of groups. I grew up in England. I went to school as a young boy in England, and I grew up at a time in England when homosexuality was banned there. It was illegal, and I lived a period when British politicians thought it was anathema even to think about changing the law, and then suddenly the activities of individuals, of groups, a certain awareness, a certain development grew and grew and grew stronger, and it forced a change in law. I believe that those are the same processes that will bring about changes in our situation. At the moment, I don't see that in Ghana there is that strong current of opinion that is saying this is something that we need to even deal with. It's not so far a matter which is on the agenda.
And Sheikh Shaibu joins me now for a conversation on the back of this. This obviously generating a lot of conversations in many circles. Good morning to you, Sheikh.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure. Thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure. Is there anything particularly wrong with what the president said in that interview?
Well, thank you very much, and permit me to use the opportunity to also still register my condolences and sympathies to the multimedia for the lost. And secondly, I think that listening to the president, I thought he sounded ambivalent about the whole issue as to whether it is morally right or wrong. That didn't come out clear. And secondly, I think that for me also he portended a certain danger, given us a certain inkling about what could happen in future respect to the possibility of a change of law that will make same-sex permissible in Ghana. And for me, there is a lesson, there's an advantage for us in that. What it means is that as somebody who is a champion of democracy himself, and knowing that he will not remain in power forever, if it doesn't happen in his time, and also knowing that there are advocates who are strongly, pushing for the change of law. And if you listen to me, he made reference to the past in the UK and the US, that what used not to be permissible with respect to now, because of the strong advocates and so on and so forth, influence the change. So he said it is bound to happen. What it means that he's talking more in future, that once we see a rising voice and then dominating the space of public discourse with respect to this issue, it's likely that there can be a change of law in future that will permit same-sex. For me, he has given us a light about a certain coming danger, which means for us. Now, thirdly, the president also fell short of making a personal statement with respect to our identity, our values as Ghanaians and as Africans. I thought that in our collective conscience, in our culture, our tradition, we are, I mean, it's an abhorrent something. It's something that we completely reject. And I thought as an African, he could also have stated a certain position. One, because I believe that he's a Christian. And secondly, he's an African. And thirdly, he's a Ghanaian. And so from all angles, definitely there must be something that he could have said, because our values underpin our identity. So if we say we're an African, we are not African in a vacuum, but there's a context. That's what makes us African. If we say we're Ghanaians, there is something about us that makes us Ghanaian. If I'm a Christian and there's something that I uphold, there's something that makes me Christian, there's something that makes me a Muslim, and I should be able to state those when the need arises. And I think that's why I felt, that's why I said he sounded ambivalent.
But are we trying to pretend that this doesn't exist, no matter how small in our country? It does exist. I
think that what the president did was also paint a certain reality. That look, this thing is happening. It's happening. Whether we reject it or not, it is happening. But the fact is that from where we are all coming from, we are accepting democracy, and democracy comes with certain attributes or values of human rights, respect for human rights, respect for life, freedom of expression, freedom of identity, and how freedom of religion,
freedom of association,
and freedom of association, and so on and so forth. But the question that arises in the context of clash of values, the question that arises, I mean, who sets the limits of these values? If we say that there's democracy, does democracy undermine our identities? Does democracy say, if you are a Ghanaian, stop being a Ghanaian? Who determines the standard for our democracy that is stripping us of our Africanness or our Ghanaianness or our Muslim identity or Christian identity? So there's a certain external force that is forcing us to reject who we are in order to
Is the force rejecting necessarily who we are? After all, we've said that it's a globalized world now, so we can't continue to hide in our little corner as Ghanaians.
And that is the dilemma in which we find ourselves. But I think that where we are going is dangerous, because whatever change that is happening in the world today with respect to matters of globalization doesn't begin with us as Africans. It doesn't begin with us as Ghanaians. It's somebody's standard. And as Africans, as Ghanaians, we have become so weak, so malleable, that because of what we need, the support we need from, that's why, you know, Cameroon, for example, I mean, clearly, states that any African country that does not allow same-sex, for example, risk being denied support.
As in aid from the West.
In aid from the West. I mean, you see, this is somebody who comes from the UK. He thinks that he holds even our fortune, our economic fortune lies in his hand. And he predicates that. And he says that, look, I will give you what you need, but for me to give you what you need, reject certain values that you uphold.
We heard, for instance, our late former president, Dr. Mills, make an emphatic statement. Is that, did President Akufo-Addo, can we say that the words that he spoke also puts us, are we clear in our minds the kind of direction that we're going?
No, that's why in my statement I said that he sounded ambivalent, because he didn't come out, one, he also fell short of stating his own, representing Ghana.
But must he? Is it about him?
I think.
Is it about him, or is it about the society? And if there are, so the fact is, if there are very loud voices, if there are people pushing for it, he is the leader. Is it not the voice of the people that we say is the voice of God?
You know, in Africa, when we even select you as a leader, even in Ghana, before you become a chief, in fact, you are a repository of our wisdom and our values. That is why if you deviate, even in traditional or clan setting, if you deviate from what the society upholds as sacred, what they say is that they will distool you. In Chi, they say, it means that what you should have done to uphold the sanctity of society, you did not do. And I think that the president also, in our Ghanaian consciousness, I mean, that's why we call him the first gentleman. And I think that he should have been courageous. I saw him in a certain dilemma, in a certain difficulty.
As that question sounded like it wasn't expected.
That's the way, you know, and he didn't want to raise so much questions at the international level, and then also back home here in Ghana, what is it that what could be the response? So I noticed that he just danced around it, you know, not stating a personal position, but I thought that, I mean, he's a Christian, he's an African, he's a Ghanaian, and like Atta Mills did.
There are other African countries, by the way, where this is allowed.
Well, I mean, for them, if they have allowed it, then for their country, for example, I mean, they have their sovereignty, and it's if in their national consciousness and conscience, they have thought that, look, for we can allow it. Then at a state level, but probably, that's why as a president, probably he could have stated that, well, I'm in for it. And so therefore, I am hoping that in future we will change our law. I will even push for it. But that he is only making it more open, that in other places, people with stronger voices work for it and make it so. If in Ghana we can see such voices, but he said that he doesn't see that strong voice.
Immediately.
Immediately.
Not,
so
yes.
that's why he sounded futuristic.
Yes.
And then I see him also accepting a reality, like a developing future, a certain accepting certain dynamics.
Isn't that a reality that we must all accept? Eventually we will get there, won't we?
Well, I mean, if you look at, I consider, I mean, the voice of evil, I mean, this is, I mean, dominating. I mean, money is now being used as a standard for everything. And you can see it happening. So what I think is that for me, he has given us an inkling into a coming danger. And I think that we must also mobilize the decent minds, the voices of conscience, true spirituality in religion, both in Islam and Christianity. We should not leave the moral space empty for such groups to dominate. In fact, in the past, that's what happened. It was left for such people, such forces to dominate. That is why you and I, even we are Muslims, we are Christians, and we cannot understand why we are there. And every Sunday, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., every Christian, and I can assure you of that, is in one church or the other. And I can listen to the pastors preaching in some of the ills. I am an imam in myself, and I deliver sermons. And I can say so for Muslims, that every Muslim between the hours of 12 o'clock and 1:30 on every Friday, you can find every Muslim young person and elder in the mosque. So sometimes we are shocked as to why are we all doing this, and our political leaders belong to one church or the other, or they attend one mosque or the other. So how come? I mean, is religion failing, or is it that we are not being sincere? Are we not? Is it that we are not honest ourselves? Even for those of us who make too much facade of religion, and I think that there's a certain gap in our spirituality. There's a certain void which we have allowed the voice of evil to dominate, and so we can see certain hypocrisy even in our own. Yeah, and that's why you can find, I mean, a Muslim, a politician who belongs to either Christianity or Islam, and there's a moral issue, and he's unable to say that, look, Christ or St. Paul said this, and I uphold it. We will not allow it.
What is it about homosexuality? Is it evil?
Well, I mean, if I speak directly from an angle of outside of religion, then I may have to subject it to say, well, democracy, human rights, people have got their own distance. Yeah, but if you put it squarely in the context of religion, and I belong to a faith tradition that completely frowns on it. One, because it undermines and a violation of the system of God. When God created, if you take the creation of man, when God created a human being, he created the first man, you notice that the world of man was incomplete. For us to perpetuate the kind of human species, there was the need for the female factor. God could have created another man so that man will get married and we see what kind of species will perpetuate.
So where have this come from?
No, it is part of the human being's own negative side. There are two forces that are pulling apart the human being. That's the force of evil and the forces of righteousness. But God intended that man will begin from the crude level, but that in faith and in righteousness, he must be refined into a true human being, worthy of the honor of God. And so that's why we keep on struggling. So prophets have come, saints, traditional wisdom. If you go to our traditions, all God is inspiring people with that which is the best for human being, and give us a sense of that which is destructive to our spirit, to our mind, and to our bodies. But the lust in us, the desire for material and physical pleasure. Because if you call any man who wants to marry a man and ask him, so what do you gain from this? Because you see, pleasure must lead you to something edifying. So it's just animalistic. Oh, so you just want to satisfy that momentary pleasure. Call the rich man there who is pushing, influencing this, whether a white man or a black man who is so rich, and ask him, my brother, oh, what do you gain from this? Just ask him. So that is what I desire. So empty desire.
So it's a personal lust.
Personal lust, which is so destructive, but it takes time for one to become conscious of it. That's why we should still hammer this.
Where do you see this ending? Because what we've done is when the issue comes up, very little. We talk about it just briefly and then we let go.
Yeah.
Do we need to talk about it and seal this in terms of what kind of direction that we want to go? How do we do that finally?
Yeah, I mean, as a society, one, I think that we must reject the kind of libertarian philosophy that puts the individual at the center. The West, for the Western democracy is the individual who is the most important factor. Come to us as Africa, as Ghanaians, as Christians, as Muslims, the society is the important factor. So when you do something whose implications spells out a certain destruction for the whole society, then religion or faith will tell you, no, this thing, let's stop it. Now, if you take Africa, for example, in Africa, the society is the most important factor. And that is why Professor Mbiti, for example, when he talks about how we are related, is that in Africa, in defining relationships, said, I am because we are, and we are because I am. There's a certain symbiotic relationship. So as an individual, you don't survive in a vacuum. You survive because a certain society gives you a certain identity. Yeah, and you must respect that collective identity.
Okay.
And so we must continue talking about it, show our abhorrence, we must reject it, we must frown on it. Mosques and churches, we must continue, make it a recurrent subject matter for discussion. Secondly, we are teaching religious moral education in school. We should be able to use this as channels, so that our children, as they grow, will also reject this idea.
All right.
And our NCCE and all our bodies, we should continue also.
Okay. Sheikh, thank you very much. I just want to share just briefly before we go what the General Secretary of the Christian Council also sent to us over the weekend. He said Ghana's culture and family life system cannot sustain same-sex marriage. Homosexuality is not only a human rights issue, it is also human existence and human survival issue. Homosexuality threatens African social protection, which is deeply embedded in the family and children, a cultural practice that gives us our cultural identity and uniqueness. From Reverend Dr. Kwabena Opunim-Frimpong, General Secretary, Christian Council of Ghana. And we've seen our religious bodies come really strong on this. Sheikh, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Sheikh Shaibu is a Muslim cleric, and thank you for joining us.